Hey guys, it's me again. Just wanted to give you guys a little follow-up video on the Pocket Cinema 6K that I've been using for a couple of videos now. Kind of go over a couple of the things that I have noticed as I've been shooting with this camera. One of the first things that I noticed was that after formatting the external SSD on the camera and recording to it, when I plugged into my computer to try and get those files off of there, it would not recognize that SSD. I tried, a different computer, I tried different USB cables, and I didn't want to lose the files that were on that drive, so I put it back on the camera to make sure that everything was still there. I was able to find the recorded files through the camera. So what I ended up doing was I pulled out another computer that I had Linux set up on, and I plugged into that machine and was able to get to those files and transfer them over to an external drive and then put them back on my server. I went online and checked the forums and checked Reddit and a couple of places like that and discovered that this is not a new issue at all with this camera, and that it also affected the 4K and 6K non-pro variants of this camera as well. So if you are familiar with that issue, then you will know that in order to fix this, what they proposed was to format the external SSD on your PC in exFAT and then connect it back to your camera, and it would work fine on the camera and you would recognize it on your Windows PC. And that does work. In none of the comments or anything that I read through on that Reddit post did I see any mention of anyone attempting to use Linux based computers to look on their SSD and get the files off after they had recorded them. So if you fall into that category of someone who did not read that first, or for whatever reason you recorded onto the thing and you do not want to lose those files, and you have a spare PC laying around, perhaps you can plug into a Linux-based machine and get those files back. Your mileage may vary on that. Another thing that I've noticed with this camera is that the coloring is very different from my Sony camera. Now, the color that I get off of my Sony camera has been, basically that camera is really good at taking photographs. Like, it's really good, and it does a lot of processing on that picture, and a lot of that comes through in the video that I get. And when I load that into Resolve, I pretty much click the auto color button, and it comes out looking like something that I'm pretty thoroughly happy with. I'm trying something different this time, and I'll see how this goes in editing. But under the settings, whenever you're looking at color mode, I think it was called, on this camera, if you pick the one that says film, it comes out really gray looking and kind of not super awesome. Whenever you click auto color on that, it still needs a little bit of work on it, and that's something that's new to me, and so I'm practicing with that still. There's another mode called video, and then another one after that called extended video, and I noticed on the monitor whenever I change to those modes that it starts looking a little bit more like what the Sony had given me before, but this one's looking far more yellowish than that. Another issue that I had with this camera, and I don't know if it is necessarily this camera that would have caused this issue, or if it's something in the food chain, whether it was my way of loading things into Resolve and just hitting OK so that it would automatically change the frame rate to match the frame rate that this is recorded in. Maybe that may have caused it, maybe something else is causing it, I'm not 100% for sure, but in one of the comments on my videos, someone mentioned that they were unable to hear the audio from this camera on their AirPods while they were watching the video on their iPhone. I wasn't able to replicate that with my Android phone or on my PC or my Linux desktop. So that may be something that was caused by the way that I encoded the video, or it may be something that was caused by a completely different issue that I had no control over, but keep that in mind as something that may arise. Alright, so I've got both of these cameras set up next to each other now. The sensors on these two cameras are slightly different, so adjusting them to where I have about the same amount of stuff in frame is not an exact science at all, but I do want to compare how far I can zoom in with my Sony camera before it starts looking, terrible, and then how far I can zoom in with my Blackmagic camera before it starts looking equally terrible. So it's been a few days now. I managed to get some footage outside with this camera, going and just kind of panning around a little bit. Tried out the zoom a little bit, just to try to get a little bit of an idea of how that looks with the ND filters that are built in, how it looked whenever I took them off. Tried a couple of different stops. I called my wife into my office to show her the two cameras side by side, and I was like, look, this is what the picture looks like on this camera, and this is what the picture looks like on that camera. Can you tell which one is the new one? And she picked the old camera because it was brighter. What actually it was doing, though, was it was kind of whitewashing a little bit. Highlights on my forehead were kind of just blowed out of, just really, really not good. The other one, even though it maintained color where it was supposed to, it kind of ended up looking like it was a little bit darker, so she wasn't so much of a fan on that. But as soon as I pulled those two pictures in, and you could start seeing the one on the left started turning all blocky. You're going to be looking at me the other way, so I'm pointing to your right, but just know this is my left. So the one on this side started looking all blocky and really, couldn't even see that I even had an eye there anymore by the time we got zoomed in. Whereas the other one, which was the new camera, when we pulled it in, you could still see all of the features, and you can see a bit of the film grain in it or whatever because of the ISO that I was shooting at, I guess. Which was another thing that I ended up looking into on this thing, and the native ISO, being a dual native ISO as it is, once you get to, like, if you're on 1,000, apparently it is better to just go ahead and bump that up to 1250 and compensate with the other settings to make that exposure that you're looking for because of the way that works. So yeah, I was shooting at 1,000 ISO. I just grabbed the settings off my other camera and was like, this is what I use, and called it a day. Now I'm using 640 as my ISO, I believe it was. So I've changed that a bit, and I've changed some other settings. Whole long story short, I was able to pull all of that in, though, and being able to see all of the details still, even whenever my eye was like this big. Like, well, like, not this big, but like the whole screen was just this eye. You could see contact details, everything over here on this side. As far as details go with this camera, especially in this format where you're going to 100% probably be shrinking this down to 1080p so that you can upload to YouTube or a similar hosting service, this goes way beyond anything that I was even, imagining for details and things like that. And you could even play with the settings a lot more than what I have to get probably an even far better picture than this. Like I said, this is still a journey for me, and we're still trying to get a basic idea of how this works. And I did find a way of holding the camera where I kind of flipped out the LCD and I kind of held that in close to kind of help stabilize that, and then using two hands I was able to somewhat stabilize it. And I think I got a decent amount of the shake out of that, but not all. I'm looking into a lens that has image stabilization built into it. With the built-in image stabilization, I will actually take it out and walk around the yard and try to get more footage and see how that turns out. But that's something that'll have to come in a future video because, as I said, I haven't ordered that yet. Still doing a little bit of research on it. So do I recommend this camera with everything that I know right now? So far, all of the things that I've run into that were issues, like the external SSD needing to be formatted on the PC instead of on the camera. The one time where audio was not present on a YouTube video that was being watched on an iPhone with AirPods. Those are very specific details that are very specific issues that are probably not going to come up a lot. I'm not going to say that they're not going to be an issue, but that still doesn't come anywhere close to outweighing the benefits that I'm getting from this camera, from being able to zoom in on the picture in editing if I'm not at the exact frame that I want to be in, if I want to move that picture around, the amount of detail that is left in this camera, the camera itself not shutting off on me every 20 to 30 minutes depending on what temperature it is in the room after recording, the ability to record straight to an SSD, the built-in ND filters, although not necessarily something that would be a huge detriment since I generally have one or two lenses for most of my cameras anyways. It still just brings a whole other level of convenience, a whole other level of quality to the video that I get, even though this is still a learning experience for me. The footage that I'm working with is a lot easier for me to deal with than what I was getting before. So for someone who is like me, someone who's in my position that is shooting off of a DSLR or a mirrorless camera that was intended for photography, and they're experiencing quality issues because whenever they're doing video, or if they're having issues with the cameras overheating and shutting down or anything of that nature, for anyone that's like that, I would definitely recommend this camera or the 4K version of this camera if they are not already invested in Canon lenses. If you're already invested in Canon lenses, then I would recommend the 6K or 6K Pro to them. The amount of features that this thing has, that even the ones that I'm probably not going to use, the fact that they're present in a camera at this price level is just definitely worth it. Like I said, this is still a learning experience for me, and as I go along with this and learn more about this camera and learn more about editing and things of that nature, I will probably have another series of thoughts on this camera. I'm sure that there will be other faults that I run into in the future that I haven't already experienced, and I'm sure there will be other benefits that I run into in the future that I haven't already had the chance to experience yet either. I'm hoping that the things that I'm learning and the things that I am attempting to implement in my videos is actually coming through in the end result, and that you guys are experiencing that improvement in quality with me. That's all I've got for you for right now. Get subscribed if you're not already subscribed, and I'll see you guys in the next video.